It's the highest office in Iowa. 41 people have served as governor. 5 Democrats are vying for your vote and the chance to take on Governor Kim Reynolds this November. Tonight, the issues that impact Iowans and the candidates' plans for the future of our state. This is a special presentation from KCCI and the Des Moines Register. Commitment 2018, Iowa Democratic Governor Debate. Live from the State Historical Building in Des Moines.
And good evening and welcome to our Commitment 2018 debate among the Democratic candidates for governor of Iowa.
These 5 people will be on the primary ballot next Tuesday. Each hopes to win the Democratic nomination to face current Governor Kim Reynolds in the November election.
I'm Stacy Horst from KCCI TV. My co-moderator tonight is Kathy Obradovich, the opinion editor at the Des Moines Register. We also want to say hello and welcome to our viewers in eastern Iowa, as well as television station KCRG is also broadcasting this debate on Channel 9.2.
We look forward to learning more about these candidates who want to lead our state. Let's begin with introductions. First of all, we have former Chief of Staff to Governor Tom Vilsack, John Norris.
Businessman Fred Hubbell.
Former Iowa City Mayor Ross Wilburn.
Registered nurse Kathy Glosson.
And former Iowa Democratic Party Chairwoman Andy McGuire. We've asked all the candidates, we've asked all the audience, I'm sorry, not to make noise during the debate. You guys can make some noise. But let's give these candidates a welcoming round of applause right now.
They got that out of their systems. We won't hear from the audience again for a while. Now let's move on to the rules of tonight's debate. Candidates will have 90 seconds to answer a question during the first half of the debate, 60 seconds during the second half. Time cues will come from the colored lights on the boxes in the front of our podium and our desktop here. The yellow light indicates 10 seconds remain. The red light indicates that time is up.
If a candidate is mentioned by an opponent, they will get 30 seconds to respond. Candidates will get 45 seconds at the end of the debate for closing statements. Thank you all for taking part tonight.
First question of the evening. Why are you the best candidate to take on Governor Reynolds in the fall? We begin with Mr. Norris.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Thank you, Des Moines Register and KCCI and all of you, my family and supporters here in the audience and those watching and listeners who are now giving us an opportunity to present our case to you. This election to me is about contesting for power against the wealthy, the special interests, and the corporate lobbyists who are running our government today. I had the experience, having served as Chief of Staff to Governor Vilsack, having run a state agency, having started and run 2 small businesses, having been the head of a state farm organization, United States representative to the United Nations for agricultural policy. Governing is, in this day and age, a difficult task because of the increased influence of the corporate lobby in our state government. You can see it in example after example under this Reynolds administration. Look at the privatization of Medicaid. That's a backdoor corporate lobby deal. Look at the lack of serious water quality initiative in Iowa. That's responsive to the corporate lobby. And look at these tax cuts and tax breaks that are carved out, that are eroding our capacity to invest in education and health care in this state. That's what we've got to fix in Iowa, and I know how to do it, and I'll get it done.
Mr. Hubbell.
Well, first of all, thank you for hosting the debate. Thank you all for participating tonight. You know, my wife and I have spent the better part of the last 30 years working in our community all across the state to try to support the progressive values and the quality of life that make Iowa a special place. I've chaired the Planned Parenthood Board. I've chaired Simpson College Board, the Iowa College Foundation Board. My wife and I helped Broadlands Hospital expand mental health services and add 2 new psychiatrists. We've worked to support environmental causes all across our state to try to improve air and water quality. But for me, the tipping point to getting into this campaign occurred last year after the end of the session, when Governor Reynolds' fiscal mismanagement and the misguided priorities of the Republican legislature defunded Planned Parenthood, stripped collective bargaining rights from families all across our state, did nothing for mental health, continued with the privatization of Medicaid, the failure there, and continued to underfund education while continuing to fund wasteful corporate giveaways. And then Governor Reynolds said it was the best legislative session ever. My wife and I looked at ourselves and we knew that was wrong. It was the worst legislative session ever. That's why we need a governor who can come in, has a proven track record in the private sector and the public sector, produce a balanced budget with the right priorities. We need to put people first in our state, which means stopping the short-sighted, wasteful corporate giveaways and investing in education and healthcare, infrastructure, and job training all across our state. I've proven in the public and private sector I know how to get those results. But I want to say one more thing. You know, it occurred to me today, Governor Reynolds just signed this tax law, and yet we have an explosion in child abuse, child neglect, and mistreatment of children in our state. And it's all because they're not funding the Department of Human Services.
And that's it's that time. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Wilburn, why are you the best candidate to take on Governor Reynolds in the fall?
Well, good evening, and thank you all for being here. It shows your time, dedication, and commitment to the future of our state. What sets me apart is I'm the only candidate that has served in elected office, and I was on City Council for 12 years in Iowa City and served as mayor. The difference that makes is that I know how to have a public hearing. I know how to set a budget. We maintained a AAA bond rating while making investments in our people and in infrastructure in our city. There's something different about having served in office. I mean, people will know a staff member. They might know a staff member, but they will definitely know the elected official who supported their issue, who listened to them, who gave them time to make their case if we disagree. But in the end, I think it helps inform how we make decisions, and our background informs that as well. I served in a K-12 education system investigating claims of discrimination and sexual harassment. I was a youth worker working with teenagers and their parents. I served in the Iowa Army National Guard and have family members who served in active duty. So I know what it's like for our loved ones to go overseas, the support their families need when they return. And all of these are areas, clean water, mental health, infrastructure. They are the types of investments and situations I found myself in as an elected official. And I hope to bring that with your support as Governor of Iowa.
Good evening and thank you. You know, the only way we're going to beat Kim Reynolds in November is to make sure that we do politics differently. I am not a typical candidate running for office. I'm not establishment, a status quo candidate. Unlike some of my opponents here tonight, I am not a millionaire businessman. I'm not an attorney. I'm also never worked for a health insurance company. I'm an intensive care nurse working for decades at the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics. I then went on to help organize my hospital into the union. I believe it's time that Iowans want a governor who's not going to put party and politics first, someone that's like them, that understands their challenges. I was a single parent raising my daughter when I was going to nursing school and then working at the hospital. I know exactly what it's like to live in Iowa and try to raise a family and make it in this state. Too many families are struggling at this time, and it's time we have a leader that's not going to put party and politics or profits ahead of them. We need a real leader that's going to step up and change their lives. Over 1 million Iowans will benefit when we raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, expand and strengthen union rights, and stand on a universal single-payer health care plan for all Iowans. The #1 job of a governor is to raise wages and improve the standard of living, and as governor, I will do just that.
Well, thank you, and thank you for doing this. It's so important that our constituents get to hear from us and hear who's going to be the best governor, and I think that's me. I come from Waterloo, Iowa, and what I learned in Waterloo was I learned about caring for other people. It's, you know, if somebody was sick, we went over and helped them out. If somebody was down on their luck, the community came together and got them back on their feet. That's why I became a doctor, because I could see the power of caring about someone, especially when they're sick or injured. But I've been going all over Iowa for the last several years, and I'm not hearing that caring anymore. I'm not hearing that. I'm hearing that people don't think they can get a fair shake, and people don't feel like they can get ahead for their families, and they honestly feel like the Reynolds administration is putting profits ahead of people. Well, I want to change that. As your governor, I'm a doctor. I will always put patients first. I took an oath to that, and I will always put people first, and I think that's what we need. You know, you've already heard tonight that we're talking a lot about health care. We're talking about this Medicaid mess, which I hope we can talk more about. Talking about mental health, talking about women's health, talking about clean air and clean water, which is really a public health issues. On health issues, there is no one who has stronger experience than I do. And so that's why I think I'm the person to lead this state and make us the state we really can be for our kids and our grandkids.
Thank you. You know, we plan to have 6 candidates here tonight. There are only 5. State Senator Nate Bolton dropped out of the race last week after allegations of sexual misconduct. Starting with Mr. Hubble, is there anything in your background that could come back and embarrass you as the Democratic nominee?
No, I don't think so.
All right. Well, why should Senator Bolton's supporters follow your lead?
Well, it comes back to what the state needs. We have a governor who has demonstrated a total lack of fiscal responsibility in our budget, and a legislature run by Republicans who really don't care about everyday Iowans. They care about outside special groups and the base of their party. I want to be the governor for all Iowans, and that means everybody in our state. We don't have a governor who cares about all Iowans today, and that's what we need, and that's what Iowans want. Because I want to pull people together, and I want to get results by focusing on the right priorities, putting people first, investments for the long term in education and healthcare and job training. And that's what we need in our state, so people can have an opportunity to actually raise their incomes for the first time in 5 years. They've been almost flat for 4 years in a row.
Is there anything in your background that could come back and embarrass you or the party if you're the nominee?
No, there is not. And with this particular issue, I think it's important that I highlight, I have actual experience working with our Education Association when I was a equity director for the Iowa City Community School District. Actually in all of my jobs, I've worked to try and help build an inclusive, welcoming environment. If someone has a complaint, try and put in places for them to go to file a certain grievance, and to make sure that they know that there is no retribution, or if someone does try and commit retribution for someone coming forward with a complaint, then there's consequences for that. But I'm reaching out to anyone who is supporting Bolton, first of all saying the issues are the issues, and it's important that we clean up our water, that we've got good paying jobs, that we restore collective bargaining for unions, all of these rights for LGBTQ folks, people of color, people with disabilities, the elderly, rural Iowa. The issues are the issues. The five of us have come forward saying that we are willing to work, we're willing to represent you, we're willing to lead the charge to make sure that Iowa is a welcoming and inclusive state. I've done it all my life, and I will continue to do that as a governor.
Ms. Glasson, as you think about people that you've interacted with in the past, is there anybody who's going to come forward and say, Kathy Glasson mistreated me in some way? Is there something in your past that could embarrass you?
Employers that we were trying to organize the workers may not like me too well, which I would hope that Senator Bolton's folks, and as a labor leader that's been organizing my own hospital as well as other hospitals for workers across the state, I have been in this state for decades standing up for working Iowans. It's clear that I've been at the state capitol when the collective bargaining bill was being, when union rights were being gutted for 184,000 public employees in the state. I was back in the capitol with our members at the capitol back in 2010 when we were trying to reverse right to work laws at the state capitol. I've been at the state capitol and we've talked about the workers' compensation attack and gutting that. I've been at the state capitol with my members and fellow union brothers and sisters from around this state actually standing up and fighting for union rights for Iowans, and I will continue to do that as governor. But one other thing I'm proud of is I'm also willing to be at the Capitol marching with students for safe gun reform laws in our country to protect our students, and standing up with immigrants in our communities. So Iowans want a real leader in this state and someone that puts their feet on the street. And honestly, I don't recall my fellow opponents standing on this stage being there with me. So I would welcome Senator Bolton's supporters to join us in this bold progressive movement to build the union movement together and strengthen working families in Iowa.
Dr. McGuire, any skeletons that we ought to know about now?
Not since anatomy class. I don't. No, I can't think of anything, but this has been a tough week, I think, for a lot of people, and certainly for the Bolton supporters. And what I would say is misconduct on the part of one person does not mean your supporters have done anything wrong. And we all believe in a lot of these issues together. And so I would ask the Bolton supporters to join my campaign. I have a lot in common with what Nate was after. He was trying to get collective bargaining put back, and that's certainly something that I've been strong on. He was trying to make sure people were cared about, that we had the health care they needed, that we had the education and the funding for the education they needed. So I don't know of anything that I would have on there, but I do think that it's important that we don't have sexual harassment and misconduct. I have been the victim of that. Felt that sting. I'm going to guess maybe you have as well. And it's something that devalues not only women, but anyone in the workplace. And we have to make sure that we have a culture right now. We have a culture with Governor Reynolds that says it's okay to harass people, as far as I'm concerned. I don't think she's gone far enough to make sure that we have the rules and regulations that say no one should be devalued at work. So I think this is a lot of issues together, but no, the only skeletons would be in my anatomy class.
And finally, Mr. Norris, anything in your background that will come back and bite you during the general election?
Well, I've been confirmed by the United States Senate and nominated by the President twice with full FBI background investigations and a White House Personnel Office background investigation. They don't send you off to represent the U.S. to the United Nations if you have trouble in your background. So I hope people can rest assured there's nothing in my background that will become an issue in this race or inhibit my ability to govern this state. Those Bolton supporters and a lot of young voters I know were enthusiastic about Nate's campaign. I just encourage you to stay involved. While it's unfortunate what happened, the issues and the causes that Nate was about are still important to all of us and to you, especially those rights for workers in this state that he was such a great spokesperson for. You know, I don't know what march I missed, but I don't think you can measure someone's commitment by missing a march. But I'll tell you, 30 years ago this month, I was marching with Cesar Chavez in California for environmental justice for migrant workers. And 20 years ago, I was marching at the battle in Seattle with Senator Paul Wellstone against the WTO and how it hurt workers in our country and family farmers. My life passion has been about social and economic justice. And we have had too much erosion of workers' rights in our society, and that's why you're seeing the growing economic disparity in this state and across this country. We have got to stop. I'll repeat what I said in the opening. We've got to stop the corporate influence on our policies and our government, and we've got to have a government that will stick up for workers' rights and empower them to have a better quality life and safety concerns for the workplace. That's imperative.
Thank you.
Mr. Wilburn, what would you do as governor to make sure all employees raise concerns about any workplace issue without feeling intimidated or having the fear of retaliation?
Part of what the governor can do is set the tone in terms of leadership. I applaud the President Winterstein of Iowa State University. And what she did was make a strong statement against sexual harassment and any Title IX violations, and that there needs to be education and training put in place. So that's part of what I would emphasize. I think the second thing that I would emphasize is making sure that people are aware of the existing process through the Iowa Civil Rights Commission, and that there's some great investigators there. I know that they do great work. I interacted with them when I was the equity officer for the Iowa City Community School District. They do a great job of making Iowans have their fair say. They make sure that Iowans are aware of the law. And I would also like to just mention, you know, with our Education Association, that we work together to try and make sure that schools were a safe place for teaching, learning, for students, parents, and staff, and a great place to work. So making sure that those systems are in place. If need be, if there are issues with that process, then making sure that folks are aware of any external process that we might set up. But through that process, they can also request a hearing in front of a judge to make a judge decide and take a look at the case.
Ms. Glosson, as governor, what is your role to make sure that employees can report workplace problems without intimidation or retaliation?
Yeah, well, first, there's a law in place that this needs to be reported and followed up on, so we have to consider that. But as a leader of the state government, and let's look at what Governor Reynolds has done. She has mismanaged her administration from the very start because her administration has been fraught with sexual misconduct and harassment for her entire term as governor. She came out saying zero tolerance, and I believe in zero tolerance. As a woman myself, we absolutely have to have that, but that's not what happened under her leadership. As governor, we need an independent third party to make sure that swift investigations occur. The state of Iowa needs to invest in that because the state itself, government should not be monitoring issues that are so important like this. And that means making sure that reporters of misconduct, discrimination, or any workplace concern go through that independent party and are addressed so that the fear of retaliation by your superiors or someone in power are not there, and the culture change becomes clear in state government that there is truly zero tolerance.
Dr. McGuire, your reaction to what you're hearing?
Well, I agree with a lot of it. I think it starts at the top. I think you have to have a leader who is known that they will not tolerate this kind of devaluing of another human being, and certainly won't tolerate someone retaliating against that person when they're just saying what's going on in their workplace. Where I've worked, we've always had rules where it's not only the person who is being harassed, but anyone around them, anyone who sees this kind of behavior is responsible for making sure that doesn't happen and reporting it to a superior. That superior is responsible for reporting it to HR. There are certain rules and regulations in place at places I've worked that make this not a tolerable situation, and I think we should have that in state government as well. But I do think it starts at the top, and if they know that I will never tolerate it, and I always think it's bigger than even women. It's all groups, it's LGBTQ, it's race issues, it's all issues where people feel like they're not valued. We need to help that, and so that would start with the top, and I would do that.
Mr. Norris.
Absolutely starts with leadership. The message you send to your state employees, not just state employees, but the entire state, that we have zero tolerance in Iowa for any kind of discrimination, be it sexual harassment or discrimination of any kind. That's so critical for productivity and respect for one another. You know, when those state workers take that online exam to make sure, or training course to make sure that they understand what is sexual harassment, indicators, you empower them to not just watch out for themselves, but their coworkers. And I want to make sure all the department heads in state government get engaged and talk to their workers about the importance of what the content of that material is, so there's a clear understanding that it won't be tolerated. So the message has to come from the top, set by example. I'm proud of my life's work of always being respectful of all folks, and make sure that individuals, be they women or other minorities, not only don't get discriminated upon, but get an opportunity to excel, when they excel, to get promoted. And there's not discrimination in opportunities as well as harassment.
And Mr. Hubble.
Well, first of all, we need a governor who makes sure that all Iowans, especially women, get treated with the respect and dignity that they deserve. And we need to recognize that that means that the governor needs to be committed to and accountable for transparency and accountability in the government. And we're not seeing that with this governor and this legislature. And it also means if you're an elected official, really you're a role model for everybody else in our society. And that's an extra burden that an elected official, I think, needs to carry with him or her. And that means that they cannot allow any kind of activity of that sort to any place in their administration. So what can you do about it? Well, I have two ideas. The first is the people who actually perpetrate, the responsible parties, they should be held personally accountable. The taxpayer should have never been obligated to pay that $1.75 million settlement in the Kirsten Anderson case. That should have been paid by the people that were involved in the sexual misconduct. Same thing is going to be true in the Jamison case. If there's fines there, legal costs there, the people involved should be the ones paying it, not the taxpayers. So in addition to that, what else can you do? It's called a whistleblower process. All public companies have these. You put it in place so people can make anonymous reports anytime there's any kind of misconduct, whether it's sexual misconduct or whether it's fraud or some kind of discrimination in the workplace. They can report it outside the HR department, outside the chain of command, the reporting relationships. It goes to an outside third party, typically an audit committee. In this case, maybe it's 3 people on the outside that are challenged to do that. They look at those reports every single week, and they take action very quickly, and there's no retribution, there's no fear of retaliation.
Thank
you. All right,
you.
thank you. Governor Reynolds signed a tax cut of over $2 billion today. Raise your hand if you would work to repeal the whole thing. Would you work to repeal it? Okay, 3 of you. You'll still get to answer. Okay, Ms. Glassen, you didn't raise your hand. Why not?
Because I think we actually have to redo the tax structure so it's progressive and not regressive.
Could some or most Iowans expect to pay higher taxes in the administration? If so, who?
Well, I think this tax cut of $2.1 billion over the next 6 years is going to put Iowa in a deficit for a time to come. And it's clearly a tax cut for the wealthy. You take let's look at it, $40,000 a year income for a family or individual will see a tax savings of approximately $92. But that same family or individual making $1 million will see a tax savings of about $19,000. So you can see who's getting the better tax deal, the wealthy Iowan or the middle or lower income Iowan. So I believe we need to go back and redo our tax structure so that the wealthy are paying their fair share, a little bit more, and the lower income folks in our state that are struggling to make ends meet pay a little bit less in taxes. So And then we're going to have to find some new revenue to generate to offset the cuts that we're going to face, and we can talk about that a little bit later.
Well,
I'm sure.
let's hear that.
Yeah, great.
We're talking about taxes.
Well, first of all, we actually have to roll back the huge tax breaks that we're giving wealthy corporations that absolutely don't need it. We start to fund things we care about, like public education and healthcare, by rolling back some of the tax credits that don't benefit Iowa's families at all and don't create good jobs. Then we actually need to look at reversing and changing how we look at our tax structure. It's not fair to low-income and struggling families, and that's my second point. And then I think we need to consider looking at other generations of revenue for the state, such as legalizing personal use marijuana. We know that there are other states in this country, particularly Oregon, that generated $85 million by doing that, and they fund public education and they fund their health care with that.
Okay, thank you. Dr. McGuire, you raised your hand. You want to repeal this tax cut. You're sort of, okay. Well, tell us what you want to replace it with, and who's going to pay more in taxes under your administration, if anyone?
Well, I look at it as big picture. I don't think it's that we don't have the revenue right now to do the priorities we need. We're cutting higher education. We're not doing enough for our schools. We're not putting enough into healthcare. So I would look at what services we need for people, because people would be my priority. And then I would look at the revenue I need to do those services. I think we've got a little backwards. And to me, when you're cutting right now for the services, the math doesn't add up to then cut your revenue.
$500 million worth of services, or do we need $8 billion?
Well, and one of the things you have to look at is you have to look at the big picture. You have to look at the whole thing. We have to look at these tax cuts we're giving, because a lot of those are things that I think probably aren't returning value. If I give you $1 for a tax cut and you're not giving me back 10 to 100 times the value, then I shouldn't be giving it to you anymore. I think we have to look there. There are some things about the reason I kind of waffled on the repeal. There are some things in this that I might want to keep. One of them is taxing the internet, because I do think for mom and pop stores or brick and mortar stores, it is unfair that they don't pay sales tax and the brick and mortar does. So there are some things I'd want to look at with this, but I do think that you've got to look at the overall picture and first look at your priorities. My priorities are people, and I've not heard people asking for a tax cut as much as I've heard people asking for their schools to be better, asking for their health care to be better, asking for the services they need, especially from DHS protecting our kids. We need those services first, and then we need to figure out the revenue we need. That's how I would approach it.
Okay, Mr. Norris, you also raised your hand. You want to repeal this tax cut. What do you replace it with, or if anything, and who pays more in taxes than they're paying right now?
I believe the tax cut was another extension of all kinds of special deals for the wealthy and corporations. 43% of that tax cut went to the top 2.5% of wage earners. 66% of Iowans got 13% of that tax cut. This is not a time to increase the economic disparity we have in Iowa. This tax cut furthers that economic disparity. When your economy is booming, we have some of the lowest unemployment in the history of Iowa right now. This is not a time when you cut taxes. You usually do that when you need to spur a declining economy. This is the time to reinvest and build resilience for when you do have a downturn. And that investment should be in education, health care, and quality of life that helps our state grow. So I would definitely repeal that tax cut for those making $250,000 a year and more. They are doing well, and when we're underfunding education and our future, that's where that investment needs to be. There are a number of other tax reforms that weren't included in this that I think make our tax system more fair. Half the states in this country tax corporate income on a combined basis. Every state around Iowa except Missouri does. If we made our system more fair to Iowa-based businesses and corporations and tax corporate income on a combined basis, that's $100 million in revenue and makes our system more fair. The big commercial and property tax cut that we passed 5 years ago is now going to cost the state $304 million in lost revenues next year. We can't pass that on to city and county governments. We need to roll back that tax cut that goes to the wealthy corporations.
Thank you. And Mr. Hubble, what's wrong with that? You know, he says he's going to repeal it, raise taxes on the wealthier Iowans. What's wrong with that plan?
I didn't say raise it, I said roll it back.
Roll it back, sorry. Well, raise it from what it is right now, right? Going to be. So, Mr. Hubble, why is your plan better than that?
Well, I've said from the very beginning, since they were talking about this tax law, that I would not sign this law. I would have vetoed it, because now is not the time to lower state revenues. She's already borrowed, the governor's borrowed $144 million from the budget. the reserve funds, hasn't paid it back yet. Consistently underfunded education, healthcare, and job training infrastructure across our state. And at the same time, we've had 2 years in a row of massive mid-year budget cuts. And they're promising that all of a sudden with this tax law, revenues are going to jump. Well, they've tried that in Kansas, they've tried it in Oklahoma, they've tried it in this country before, and it doesn't work. On the other hand, now that it's passed, it's a different issue. Now that it's passed, you can't veto it anymore, you have to deal with it. There are some things in that tax law, if you look at it, if you don't use just a purely partisan eye, getting rid of federal deductibility. Democrats have been trying to get that for decades around here, have never been able to do it. That would help our state. Levelizing the playing field between internet businesses and Main Street businesses is a good idea. They actually proposed having a tax credit review panel. It's about time. I did one of those in 2010. That's the only way we're actually going to address the wasteful corporate giveaways. So those are some of the things we want to keep, but it should have been done on a revenue neutral basis, and it shouldn't be done on a way that it defers the benefits for the low income people and it accelerates them for the big businesses and for the wealthy.
Mr. Wilburn, you heard he wants to keep federal deductibility, he wants to tax the businesses that are selling goods and services on the internet, look at those tax credits. You want to repeal the whole law, what's wrong with his approach?
I'm not saying there's anything wrong with his approach, but it's repealing it and looking at those tax credits, that tax incentives that make sense during a time like this where we've got a hole in the budget. It's not something that we can afford to do. Iowans will respect, and Iowans want to have meaningful, sensible taxes based on the services they are receiving. Iowans have been telling us they want mental health care. Iowans have been telling us they want water clean. Iowans have been telling us that they want education funded, K-12 education in particular. And so in addition to a review panel, I would make it an annual review. We have a lot of human service agencies that receive grants from the state federal government. We make them give a report every year. There are times if they are not doing what they say they're going to do, then they're at risk for losing that particular funding. If there's a tax incentive that is not, if it's long-term, if it's not providing investments in clean energy, if it's not a short-to-term, mid-sized tax credit, then it's something that we would need to reconsider whether or not we would do. But I think a critical piece is putting that review panel in place, but also looking at other types of revenue after applying. I'm willing to take a look at professional gambling as a potential source. I'm interested in taking a look at medical marijuana growth for some other states that might be willing to purchase from Iowa. Those are a couple of revenue
professional
parts.
gambling, you mean sports betting?
Sports betting,
on
yeah.
professional sports, is that what you're saying?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Thank you. For advice to a fellow candidate here, and I know this gives Fred 30 seconds, but I just advise you to be cautious about being against that tax cut before you were for it. That will be a difficult position to both criticize it and defend it in this general election if you get there.
Mr. Wilburn, do you want to respond to that?
No, I was actually.
You're talking
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
He was talking to Mr. Hubble.
No.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Mr. Hubble, do you want to respond to that?
Well, actually, I don't find any problem with that at all because what I said was, when that tax law was being debated and discussed, my campaign put out statements from me saying it should be vetoed because it's very risky and it's fiscally irresponsible to take that step. However, once the governor signs it, it is a law. You can no longer veto it, so you have to deal with it as it is. And I think, when you're a governor, you have to recognize that you're a governor for everybody, not just a few people. You need to find the pieces that are good and try to keep those and get rid of all the rest.
Okay. All of you have said that you would repeal the so-called fetal heartbeat law, which bans most abortions after a fetal heartbeat is detected at about 6 weeks of pregnancy. Is that right? You would all repeal the fetal heartbeat law? Is that right? Yes? Okay. So, if that is struck down by the courts, would you compromise and be comfortable with the previous ban on abortions in the state of Iowa at 20 weeks of gestation? Dr. McGuire?
As a woman and as a doctor and as a mother of 5 daughters, I do not think that anyone should get between a woman and her doctor. So any of these laws that make it hard for a doctor and a patient to do what they need to do, understanding those complex situations. These are really complex situations. As a doctor, I can tell you, These are excruciating situations, and we need to make sure that every one of those, which is so unique, is done between a doctor and a patient. And what I would do, instead of this kind of extreme abortion laws, is I would get more birth control. When we defunded Planned Parenthood, that was just wrong. We needed to put that money there so 15,000 women still had their Planned Parenthood clinics, and that if we have more birth control, make it affordable and accessible, we will have less abortion. That's the way to go about it, not the way they're going about it with these laws.
Mr. Norris, is there a room for compromise on this issue?
We've already reached a compromise in this country with Roe v. Wade that respects the woman's right to privacy and her own personal decision and balances that against the child. Our focus should be on helping our children have a brighter future, not about taking rights away from women. Listen, for those folks who are committed to religious belief about when life begins, I respect that. I respect that. But we shouldn't use government as the vehicle to strip away other people's rights who don't believe the same. It is fundamental in our country that we respect individual and personal rights. And taking this right, this most fundamental right, away from women is just wrong.
And Mr. Hubbell, Iowans are split on abortion. How do you work with Iowans who support abortion, bans?
Well, let me give you a story, example. You know, when I was on the board of Planned Parenthood back in the 1980s, a Catholic nun who was running Mercy Hospital at the time came to me and asked me to go on the Mercy Hospital Catholic board. And I had tens of thousands of people working for us and as customers. So I said, sure, I'd be happy to go on your board, but you need to understand something. I'm also on the Planned Parenthood board. And I'm not going to go off the Planned Parenthood board to go on your Catholic hospital board. She thought about it, about 10 seconds, came back and said, you know, there's a lot more that we agree on than we disagree on. I'd love to have you on my board. And so we agreed to work together to expand access to health care. That's what my campaign is all about, expanding access to health care. This governor, this legislature have spent 2 sessions, whether it's privatization of Medicaid, no progress on mental health, taking away Planned Parenthood funding, stripping the rights of women to be able to have access to the health care that they need twice now, last year and this year, with very extreme legislation. We need to go the opposite direction. We need a governor who's going to expand access to health care rather than continuing to limit it. And that's what my campaign is all about.
Mr. Wilburn, what's your reaction to what you're hearing so far?
It's so important that we not interfere with the right of a woman and her health care provider to have the full spectrum of options available, not just for abortion, but for education. In a lot of cases, just my experience back in the school district, whenever issues of birth control or education about health care, the health unit, you know, there were some who were against abortion, but they wouldn't allow that education, that prevention to go on. And so we need to have prevention available. We need to try and work to see if there are ways to support, if we can come together about education, can we come together about supporting funding for adoption and training for parents. Those are the ways that we can go about that. But you know, as a man, I'm not the one that has that personal decision. And I totally respect that. And it's just continuing to try and I realize that. And the big emphasis that I would try and put out in terms of what was done, regardless of your feelings about abortion, Roe v. Wade is the law of the land. And this was passed knowing that it is anti-constitutional, it's against the Constitution. And you know, taxpayers' dollars that are going to go towards defending this. The other thing I've heard, I haven't seen this, that there's some law business that is looking at trying to fund that pro bono. And so again, we'll see how that happens, but where's that money going to go? So, you know, follow the money on that one.
Thank you.
Yep.
Ms. Dawson, would you be okay with the compromise at going back to the 20-week ban?
No, I wouldn't be okay with that. And as a woman myself that decided to have my daughter as a single mom, that was my choice. I believe that politics and government should stay out of women making decisions when it impacts their health. That is clearly a decision between the woman and her physician or healthcare provider. We need to fully fund Planned Parenthood and make sure that women have access to safe and legal abortions. I have seen and heard the consequences, medical consequences, of women that can't access safe reproductive health care services. We need to absolutely stand up and make sure women have that choice, because it is their own bodies and they have the right to decide what they do with it.
What about about people who do not want abortion in this state to be legal?
They have the option. It's a choice whether you have an abortion or not. The option should be there for women to make that decision. If someone doesn't want to have an abortion, that is their decision, but if they do, it should be available to them.
So no compromise?
No.
Okay.
All right. You guys, you guys have, okay. Let's remind the audience that you take time away from the candidates when you applaud, okay? You guys have all criticized the privatized Medicaid that is in place in state government today and talked about bringing it back under state management, state administration. Some of you even talked about doing it on day one, okay? So Mr. Norris, when can Iowans expect to see changes in Medicaid? How long can Iowans actually expect that process to take?
Well, day one, we begin the change. We've eroded our human capacity, our fiscal, our human infrastructure in state government to administer this right away. So you've got to phase it back in over time. The last thing you want to do to these most vulnerable Iowans is have a constant changing of their care coordinator. So we bring back in the most severely disabled and most severe mental ill patients first, so that we can stabilize them as we rebuild the capacity for the state to manage Medicaid in Iowa. This is best guess, because it's going to take rebuilding a workforce and training employees and navigating the transfer. I would suspect it's going to take 2 years to bring this back into a state-administered Medicaid program, but it's essential we do it. It's essential that Medicaid be focused on health outcomes, not profits for insurance companies. It is fundamentally flawed today because those insurance companies took it over with a backdoor deal with the Branstad-Reynolds administration, and they wanted to turn a quick profit. The only way they're going to turn a quick profit is to deny services and delay payments, and that is wreaking havoc on our healthcare providers and our most vulnerable Iowans. So we've got to have managed care so it's run efficiently, but the focus has to be on bringing that long-term costs down for Medicaid by investing in individuals and their health care needs, so we do a better job of maintaining and improving their health outcomes rather than threatening their lives.
Thank you. Mr. Hubble, Mr. Norris says he can do it in 2 years. How long do you think it would take you to reverse the privatization of Medicaid? And what can Iowans expect?
Well, I think we need to recognize first that the privatization of Medicaid has been an absolute failure in our state. And I've been saying that ever since last fall. Over 40,000 Iowans have had their benefits denied or reduced. Many providers don't even take Medicaid patients anymore because they don't get paid properly. Others have gone out of business because they don't get paid properly. And our state hasn't saved anywhere close to the amount of money that they're supposed to save, although who knows what they've saved or not, because the governor can't give us any reliable information about that. So what I would do is, beginning on day one, you cancel the contracts under whatever time frame is allowed. You start to recruit people into DHS. But we need to understand, our teachers have had their collective bargaining rights eliminated, and so have the people at DHS and state workers. It is not going to be easy to recruit people back to those jobs unless we restore collective bargaining. That's going to be essential to being able to attract the kind of people we need to come in and do that work, which they were doing before when they had collective bargaining. And now they know how they've been treated, and they want to make sure they're protected when they come back. So what I don't want to do is rush into it and do it so fast that all of a sudden everybody who's a patient gets put through all the confusion and the problems that they had when they privatized it the first time. I want to make sure it's a seamless process. So you cancel the contracts, you hire in the people, you change the leadership. The people who are leading that effort should not be there when I'm governor because they don't know what they're doing and they're taking it in the wrong direction. And then we need to hire the people back and gradually bring it in piece by piece so there's no disruption in people's services.
And is it going to take more than 2 years or less?
No, I think it'll take less than 2 years.
Less? How much less?
I think my goal would be to have it done within a year.
Within a year. Mr. Wilburn, how long does it take to reverse the privatization of Medicaid and bring it back under state management, if that's what you would propose to do?
That's a good question. And I'm not going to do what what the Republican governors have done and do something behind closed doors, do it instantaneously without a plan. The planning starts the day after the general election. That's part of a transition team activity to try and bring this back under state management. And the plan will dictate the amount of time that it's going to take. I mean, hopefully, within 2 or 3 years would be great. I'm not going to force something that we don't necessarily know what's going to, if it's going to take that long or not. If it can happen sooner, then fantastic. And but I've had former students of mine when I taught at the University of Iowa that are providers that are telling me about them not being able to be paid, reimbursed for critical services that they are delivering. We've all heard the stories about people that are needing care, that there's hold-ups in terms of whether there's some type of customized, wheelchair or things of that nature that they're going to need. So I'm not going to do what was done in the first place. That there's got to be transparency. There's got to be a plan rolled out, and we would put that in place. But that would be a transition team activity.
Do you get the legislature involved in that plan?
I think you get leadership in the legislature. You bring in some providers. You bring in some recipients, so that we have folks at the table that can help make an informed decision. And that would, as I like to do things planfully, I want to make sure that I'm making a planful decision and not picking an arbitrary number out of the air.
Okay, Kathy Glassman, you've heard a cautious and slow, as easy does it approach. How long is it going to take you to get rid of privatized Medicaid?
Well, honestly, I don't think we'll have a clue if we model ourselves after what we left Kansas like. I just heard that they can't figure out what's going on with Medicaid in the state of Kansas, and now that's the director of our Medicaid services here in Iowa. So as governor, I think we need to roll back the Medicaid privatization as quickly as possible. But I honestly don't think we know exactly how long it will take, because we don't even know how much savings we're getting out of the program by giving corporate contracts to the governor's friends. So as quickly as possible, I would do it as an executive action because that's how it was rolled back. It worked effectively for the patients, and the providers were paid. As quickly as possible, get it back under a state program that was effective and efficient and lower costs. And then that's only the first step. Then we need to transition from Medicaid to a universal single payer plan, which I've been speaking about since day one of this campaign, to cover every Iowan.
And Dr. McGuire, how long should it take to get rid of privatized Medicaid?
Well, if someone's been involved in Medicaid, it is something that you have to look at the time. But the first day, I would do the executive order to start this process. But it is a process. And there are different parts of Medicaid, and those would be handled differently under my administration. But what you have to do is you have to do what wasn't done when we put in this privatization of Medicaid. That is, you have to talk to the stakeholders. You have to involve the legislature. Even though I don't think you need a bill, you have to involve them. They represent the people in Iowa. You have to make sure that patients are always at the center. Always at the center. You have to make sure that the provider is paid. Right now, we're not paying some of our providers. We have 20 to 30 rural hospitals that could go under with the present way we're doing Medicaid. I would make sure we protect those and the small businesses like physical therapy and home health that are also not being paid and are going to maybe not be able to make it. And then thirdly, you've got to make sure that you're fiscally responsible. We are not fiscally responsible right now. And you can be with this, but you have got to make sure you have someone who knows what they're doing. I've worked in Medicaid. I know how to fix this from day one, but I would always make sure that I would never do it as faster than it would be okay to take care of patients. The last thing is we do have to invest in our patients. We have to invest in healthy behaviors, making sure they get their preventive care, because long term, that's how you actually help the fiscal responsibility of this program. So there are so many things I would do, and I have the expertise to actually fix it.
Okay. Well, we are going to take a short break, and we'll be back with more questions for the candidates. We're live at the State Historical Building. This is the debate featuring the Democratic candidates for governor from KCCI and the Des Moines Register.
Welcome back, everyone, to our Commitment 2018 debate featuring the 5 candidates for the Democratic nomination for governor of Iowa. For this portion of the evening, we're going to be asking specific questions to each candidate, and you'll all have 60 seconds to answer.
And we will begin with Fred Hubbell. If you win the primary, Republicans are going to portray you as being out of touch with people who live paycheck to paycheck. How do you respond to that?
You know, I think what Iowans are interested in at this point is somebody who's going to come in and fix the fiscal responsibility that's rampant all over our government and the misguided priorities. Everywhere I go, people are complaining about their health care being denied or reduced. They're complaining about their schools having bigger class sizes, having to skip band class and skip art. And they're talking about not having any personal income growth for the last 4 or 5 years. So I go out and I listen to them, and I listen to them again, and we share ideas. We talk about how we can make this state better and give more opportunities to people all across Iowa. And then they tell me that, you know, they like my campaign because they know my experience in the private sector and the public sector, delivering results for people, and they know that I've worked on the values and quality of life that make this Iowa a special place. So they like the combination of experience and values and understanding their issues. And that's what's important to the voters.
But you didn't really answer Stacey's question, which was about the class warfare that you're going to face if you're the nominee in the general election. You know, you've got a governor who is running around the state talking about her experience as a grocery bagger and the jobs that she had growing up, not as a wealthy person. So, I mean, how do you respond specifically to that attack on you? Because
I don't think Iowans care what your background is in terms of how you grew up here or what school you went to there. Did you bag groceries or did you work in this business? I think what Iowans care is want to know about, do you care about them? Do you listen to them? Are you going to help improve their lives? Or you're just talking about it and then you never do anything? Governor Reynolds says a lot of things, but you look at her budget, she never puts the budget behind their priorities. So I have no idea what her priorities are. People know what my priorities are. I'm going to invest in people first, education, job training, healthcare, and infrastructure all across our state. And that's what people are looking for.
Mr. Wilburn, Governor Reynolds has over $4 million in the bank. You raised less than $8,000 so far this year in your campaign. Why should Democrats feel confident in your ability to run a winning campaign in the general election?
Well, first of all, Iowans, and especially Iowa Democrats, know that at the end of the primary, we all come together. We come together with feet on the ground. We come together with money, resources. There have been Democratic candidates who've been outfunded in the past, some who have lots of money, some who don't. And we've had winners and losers. I think of, remember back, Shirley Chisholm, former senator from, representative from New York. And she didn't have a lot of money, but she talked about ideas and issues, and her campaign slogan was unbossed and unbought. Iowans do not want to see money dictate the results. Iowans across parties have talked about clean water. They've talked about the ability to make a living. They've talked about mental health care. So those are things I'll emphasize, and I will work together with the folks up here on stage to try and help make that happen.
Okay. Ms. Glosson, after running a campaign designed to attract the most progressive voters, how do you unify Iowans to vote for you in the general election? Do you move to the center and risk losing your base?
No, I don't think we need to move to the center at all. I think that's why Democrats have lost 11 out of the last 14 governor's races in the state, by putting forth the same losing formulas and strategies. That's why we're building a bold progressive grassroots movement. First-time voters involved in this campaign that have been activated for the first time. This is about getting voters excited and Iowans excited about getting to the polls again. It's about improving their lives, and there's nothing radical about having a living wage, a $15 minimum wage, ensuring that they don't have to worry about how they're going to pay their health care bills at the end of the day. It's ensuring that we have clean water and that our students, when they go to school, are going to come home safe at the end of the day. That's what Iowans want and deserve, and we shouldn't settle for anything less.
Do you worry that you are catering to maybe the Bernie Sanders part of the party and not maybe the Hillary Clinton part of the party? Don't you need those folks to come on?
Well, of course we do, and of course we all want these things, and so there shouldn't be, we unify through these issues, and so it's what Iowans deserve and what we want. And we have Republican voters out there that love our campaign because we are an issue-based, people-powered campaign, and that's what it's going to take to beat Kim Reynolds in November.
Dr. McGuire, you were the state Democratic Party chair in 2016. Some Iowa Democrats are disappointed that you didn't deliver the state for Hillary Clinton. How can you reassure them that Democrats would see more success with you as their nominee and as head of the party?
Well, I can tell you, we did hard work to get everything we could do. I won't say that. Everything we could do to elect our candidates up and down the ticket. And so I'm very proud of our county chairs. I'm proud of our activists. I'm proud of what we did. We were fiscally sound. We did a great job of getting the infrastructure of the Democratic Party done. And when a national wave comes over the top, there's not much you can do about it. And so I'm proud of the work we did, and I know I can do that as the candidate. I've been talking to people all over the state, and it's not about Bernie anymore. It's not about Hillary anymore. It's not about Martin O'Malley. It's not about any of those candidates. It's about the terrible legislation that has been passed in this Republican House and Senate and this Republican governor. That's what people are talking about. They're talking about their lives being really disrupted by this terrible collective bargaining, by work comp, by the terrible women's issues that we've talked about, by voting. This is a problem, and that's what's uniting us, and we will be united in this election.
Is there anything you regret about your service as state party chair? You've talked about what you were proud of. Is there anything you regret?
Oh, I think you always look back and think about doing this or doing that. I can tell you that everybody I worked with, our hearts were in the right place. We wanted to get democratic values across. We wanted to make sure we elected people who had those democratic values. So that part I'm certainly not regretting.
Mr. Norris, you left Iowa and you worked in Washington, D.C. for years. Republicans and some Democrats claim that you are a Washington insider. How do you respond to that?
President Obama called my wife Jackie, asked her to go to work in the White House. Secretary Vilsack called me, asked to go help him serve Iowans and the nation at USDA. If I'm a Washington insider, it's because I went to Washington to work for Iowans. And that's why we returned home as soon as our service was done. That's why we left. We always intended on coming home after our service is done. But I tell you what, it doesn't help to have a governor who knows the details of USDA because of what they're doing and what the policies are set for Iowa farmers and rural communities. I think that's an asset. It doesn't hurt to have a governor who went to the United Nations and learned how our U.S. ag policies don't just impact Iowa farmers, but farmers and food production around the globe. And it doesn't hurt to have a governor who's been on the Federal Energy Commission and leading the fight against climate change with renewable energy and energy efficiency. So I think those experiences I had add to my ability to be a governor of this state on key issues for our future.
All right, thank you. Okay,
I guess
so
we're going to continue with our questions for all 5 candidates now.
Okay, and starting with Mr. Hubble. U.S. News said Iowa was the best state in the nation as a place to live. Certainly Governor Reynolds has been touting this in television interviews and as she travels around the state. Do you agree Iowa is #1? Why or why not?
Well, you know, I learned a long time ago that you should not pay attention to what Washington think tanks or other outside parties talk about. What you should listen to is the people. The people in your company, like in Yonkers, the people who are on the sales floor. All those people, they knew their customers, they knew the markets, they knew what was working, what wasn't working. So what I pay attention to is what I hear from the people all across our state. We've been to all 99 counties. We've been listening to people for over a year now, and we're getting a lot of input from them about how dissatisfied they are, because they know that this governor and the legislature cannot manage a budget properly. They know that the misguided priorities are resulting in extreme legislation in this state that is not typical of Iowa. They know that we've been underfunding education, underfunding healthcare, and that's starving rural Iowa particularly, because their schools and their healthcare providers are losing people, they're losing resources, and they can't provide the education and healthcare that people want.
You're saying Iowa is not the best state in the nation as a place to live and
Absolutely.
work. Absolutely. Is there a state that you think is a better model for the things that you're talking about?
Well, what I'm talking about is you know, we need to have a governor and a legislature who are willing to invest for the long term. They're following the old trickle-down theory. You just cut everything that you can, reduce your revenues, and hope that you know, all of a sudden revenues go up. It's been proven many times not to work. I've seen what works is investments in people, investments in education and healthcare and in infrastructure, restoring collective bargaining. That's what can help people actually have better quality lives. We can attract higher quality jobs, and we can have a sustainable economy based on our state's strengths, not tax credits.
Okay, and Mr. Wilburn, is Iowa #1?
I would say Iowans are #1. When we have people of color, youth of color in K-12 education that are overrepresented in special education, disparities there. When we've got people of color that are incarcerated, some for nonviolent offenses, then that's not right. When we've got people in the LGBTQ plus community who are facing discrimination and threats of conversion therapy. When we've got rural farmers who are fearful of the instability that President 45 creates with his tweets related to trade and tariffs. That's not right. Iowans need certainty from a governor. They need planful from our governor and government planfulness. And we can take Iowa and make it the state that we can be.
Ms. Clausen, do you agree with U.S. News & World Report? Is Iowa #1 in the nation to live and work?
I think we should ask the 381,000 Iowa households that struggle every single month to make ends meet in the state. Or let's ask the 600,000 recipients of Medicaid that need those services and can't access those. Or let's talk about the 184,000 public employees that lost their union rights under this governor and the prior governor's leadership. And let's talk about the nearly 15,000 Iowans that can't access health care and reproductive services, particularly in our rural communities, because we defunded Planned Parenthood and closed clinics that provided essential health services to both men and women. And let's also ask the hundreds of thousands of teachers and nurses in this state that go to work and are overworked and underpaid every single day, if they agree with the story in that report.
All right. And Dr. McGuire, do you agree?
Well, I love Iowa, but I have trouble thinking that we're #1 when I talk to people all the time who are struggling with mental health, with substance abuse and addiction. You know, we're 50th in mental health beds. That's not #1. We're 47th in mental health providers, and we've turned our sheriffs really into our first-line mental health providers. And, you know, God bless them for keeping people safe, but they have nowhere to take them, so they take them to jail, or they take them to emergency rooms, two of the most expensive and worst places for someone in crisis. If we want to be #1, we have got to make mental health a priority so that we can get out of being 50th and 47th. Also, when I was growing up, education, we used to be #1. We were certainly in the top 5. We are not any longer. And that's because we're not giving the resources we need to have the teachers have enough to teach our kids. And that's in every zip code. I talked to some people in Pekin, a rural school. They're getting squeezed because of the transportation costs and the lack of us putting any more revenue into there. We put 1% increase in this year. That's not how you make that #1. So I would argue with that statistic.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Norris, are you going to argue with that statistic?
Well, I am, because if you look at the underlying data in that study, it went back 3 years, so 2015, 16, and 17. So it doesn't account for the erosion of the last 3 years under the Branstad and now Reynolds administration. In that study, we were ranked 21st in the country for fiscal responsibility, and half that score was because of our bond rating. That was the bond rating they inherited from the Vilsack and Culver administration, which they are eroding with this deficit spending. It ranked as high in infrastructure, in education and healthcare. With the privatization of Medicaid, we're going to see that healthcare, especially those rural hospitals, go down in terms of level of services. It ranked as high in education, but with the consistent underfunding of education in the last 3 years, that's on its way down, and we're failing to invest in our infrastructure. So they can brag about it now, but if they continue the path we've been on since the 3 years that data was accumulated, they have to own up to the fact that they're failing in so many of those areas that study highlighted.
Okay. We asked KCCI viewers and Des Moines Register readers to submit questions for tonight's debate. This is one of the questions we've received from them. This question came by email from Tony Davis. He writes that other studies noted that Iowa is the 3rd worst place for people of color. Mr. Wilburn, what would you do to make Iowa a progressive place of inclusion and welcoming of diversity to prevent profiling and discrimination?
Our campaign theme has been Let's Be Iowa. And we arrived at that by listening to Iowans and them looking around and seeing some of the disparities in place. From hearing and seeing the blame being pointed by President 45, for folks who are in our state that do not have citizenship. And we all know that they've been living and working and contributing to our state. So part of it is just making the statement that we welcome you here. Part of it is trying to work against some of the ICE raids that go on. If there's a law that's been broken, if there is a specific individual warrant that's out, that's a different case. But some of these blanket raids that have been going on, we need to work with our Attorney General and Attorney Generals across the state to say that we're not going to continue that. We're going to try and work for things that we all want. We all want to be able to make a living. We want jobs. We want good paying jobs. We want good health care. We don't want to face discrimination. And so part of it is a messaging thing, but I think the other piece are some practical actions, some of what I talked about.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And Ms. Glosson, how do you make Iowa a progressive place of inclusion and welcome diversity?
Vote for me in this election cycle. I come from a union that is a very large international union, and we represent mostly people of color and women. So this is something that I understand as a union leader. We've studied it, we've learned about it. We have to actually talk about, in this state, if we're going to be welcoming and inclusive for all people, we have to understand the institutions of structural and institutional racism that has grounded itself in every regulatory and policy and law that we pass in this state and in this country. And we need leaders in state government across this country, and one in Washington, D.C. would be good, to make sure that we actually have this conversation and open it up to communities to have this conversation about inclusivity. And do we carry biases that we don't even recognize in each of us just because of the history of racism in our country? We cannot ignore that, and we need leaders in government to recognize it. I happened to be in Sioux City where they had a community gathering where they discussed this and brought in a facilitator that knew how to handle a community conversation. It was remarkable to see the community coming together to have these open dialogues.
Okay, Dr. McGuire.
What I've learned from the last couple of years of going all over Iowa is that you need to listen to communities of color. We have the Iowa Black Caucus in the Democratic Party, and we have the Latino Caucus. And when you listen to people all around Iowa, listen to those communities, that's when you learn what the solutions are. What I've been very struck by is one size doesn't fit all, and it can't come from some central location that isn't understanding the differences in those communities. So what I would do is listen to those communities and work with them as the governor, because they know the solutions, they know the problems, and they know how to get to those solutions with the state government.
Okay, Mr. Norris, your response to what you've been hearing?
Well, I'll tell you what, it's certainly not elevating Steve King to be your co-chair of your campaign, which is what Governor Reynolds did. That sends the wrong signal for Iowa and who we are as a people. We should look at what Governor Ray said as an example by welcoming the Southeast Asians to Iowa after the Vietnam War. When I launched my campaign, I started out in Storm Lake, because that community is growing because they're welcoming new immigrants, not without struggles. So when I was in Humboldt, sat in that VFW and talked to those community leaders about the new pork plant going in Wright County, I said, you're going to have an influx of Latinos and African refugees. Go to Sioux Center, go to Storm Lake, talk to them about the challenges they've had, because you're going to be much better off if you embrace diversity than try to resist it. And that's the leadership the governor should be providing this state, is embracing diversity, because those new immigrants are helping repopulate a lot of rural Iowa, helping our workforce needs, and bringing a whole new sense of Iowa. Diversity makes us stronger. I believe that, and as governor, I'm ready to lead that.
Okay. And Mr. Hubble, how do you make Iowa a progressive place of inclusion and welcome diversity?
Well, it starts with leadership. It always does. And that's what we're not seeing from this governor. You know, her style, going back to your previous question, is all about divisive politics. Pick up the ideas that divide people rather than the ideas that unite people. So we need a governor who's going to stand up and put people on her administration and the department heads and on the key people that report to her and work in state government that actually represent our community of the state. We don't have that today. You know, I'm proud that our campaign is a very diverse campaign, and it represents the state that we live in and the state that we expect to live in the future. And that's the kind of governor I want to be. I want to make sure all voices are heard in my administration, because we need to send that kind of direction. We need to be welcoming, we need to be inclusive, and we need to listen to everybody and get their ideas how we can improve the economy and the opportunities for everybody, not just the few. And it also means that you know, we've got to recognize what Governor Ray said and what Tom Vilsack said. We don't have enough people. We're not going to recruit people if we're passing extreme legislation.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Ms. Glosson, Ken Clark sent in this question. What legislation will you introduce regarding sensible gun laws?
Oh, that's easy. And I'm the first Democratic gubernatorial candidate on this stage to receive the Candidate of Distinction from Moms Demand Action. I came out in November with the beginnings of my gun reform policy, which is a 72-hour waiting period before purchasing a firearm, raising the minimum age to purchasing a firearm to age 21, universal comprehensive background checks on every gun sale in the state of Iowa, and then a ban on high-powered assault rifles in this state. Because there is not a radical notion that when a family or a parent sends their child to school or someone to work, that they come home safe at the end of the day.
Right, Dr. McGuire, do you agree with what you just heard?
Well, I do. I've been in the emergency rooms when I've seen the weapons of war, I would call them, do to people. And that doesn't take you long to realize we should not have those on our streets. And I do agree with the background check, and I do agree with the waiting period. But I think we have to talk about, this isn't about your right to have a shotgun if you're on an acreage and you want to protect yourself. That's not the rights we're talking about. We're not talking about the rights of hunters. We're talking about the rights for anyone to be safe in a movie theater, in a school, walking down the street, going to a concert. That's the rights I want to protect. So I would want common sense gun laws that would make sure that those rights are protected and that people are safe.
Personal liability for gun owners. We've seen situations where now children are using their parents' weapons to carry out mass shootings.
Well, first of all, I think there should be safety issues. They should be locked up, the guns should be locked up and protected so that children cannot get to them and use them in a manner they shouldn't. So I think that's one of the first things we could do.
Do you go after gun owners if they don't lock up their guns?
I think you have to hold adults responsible.
Okay, all right. Mr. Norris, what sensible gun laws would you propose, or that our reader here, Mr. Clark, might think was sensible, and just tell us your plan for guns.
Sure. Well, first of all, congratulations, Kathy. You must have beat me to the mailbox, but I was the second candidate to get the candidate of distinction for the Moms Demand Action, a great group, trying to bring common sense gun laws to our state of Iowa. You know, I am a hunter. My brother is sitting up there, just won his 7th state shooting championship last weekend in Indianola. This isn't about taking away sporting guns or hunting guns. This is about making sure we can reduce gun violence and protect and prevent gun violence in our state. So my philosophy is, if you need a gun right away, you probably don't need a gun right away. And we should have a waiting period for particularly for any kind of gun in Iowa. There's no harm in that. Plan for it. Plan your purchase 3 days ahead and you'll be fine. You know, we also need to make sure that anything that converts a weapon into an automatic functioning weapon has no place in our society, and those should be outlawed. We can move forward on a number of good measures on the mental health side too, to make sure we're helping Iowans so we reduce the threat of someone that isn't able to handle a gun and shouldn't be owning one. So common sense gun laws that don't infringe upon the rights of gun owners to hunt and sport shoot, I think Iowans will get behind.
All right, Mr. Hubble, what's your plan for responsible gun laws?
Well, I think all Iowans would welcome more common sense gun laws, but our governor says it's a federal issue, and we have reasonable laws in our state, so end the conversation. And I think she's wrong on both counts. You know, what I think we need to do is recognize that the discussion shouldn't be about gun rights and gun control. It should be about gun safety and public safety. That's the conversation that's missing. I have 8 county sheriffs that are supporting our campaign because they know I'm committed to public safety. And I've been talking to them about these issues. And they want to support public safety, and they want to have common sense gun laws. Matter of fact, they want discretion back to be able to decide whether a license to get a gun should be allowed or not. That was taken away last year by this legislature. And I think they should have that discretion. I also think we should not be putting more guns in our schools. That would be a step in the wrong direction. And I also think that, look, every 34 hours in our country, a youth is killed with a gun. We need to make sure there's a lot more gun safety for youth in our state so that we can prevent those kind of, sometimes mostly accidental, but sometimes otherwise accidents.
Right. Mr. Wilburn, what's your plan for gun safety?
I too support sensible gun ownership, and it should be about safety. I welcome and thank Moms Demand Action for candidate distinction as well. You know, not only background checks here, but also trying to push our representatives in DC for comprehensive national background check system. It needs to be updated. There's differences between the states and at their compliance with upgrading that information. But you know, right away after the last debate we had, a statewide gun ownership group, they right away put out fundraising ads on all of us, calling us anti-gunners. And part of it is the governor saying we don't need to jump to that extreme. It is not about taking away the rights of hunters. It is, you know, some of the weapons of war. But even beyond that, we just had a previous question about safety. It is about school safety and personal safety. But even the stand your ground law, you know, people of color, young people, others, you know, just putting that in place sends a strong signal of unwelcomeness here in the state. And it's something that I would try and reverse.
Thank you.
Well, more questions for the candidates are just ahead tonight.
We want to thank everybody for watching on TV, the live streams, and a special hello to Eastern Iowa. Television station KCRG is also carrying this broadcast on Channel 9.2. Governor's Debate from KCCI and the Des Moines Register. We'd like to thank our host for the evening, the State Historical Building.
And now we have a lightning round of questions, some a little more lighthearted, and some mostly should require just a one-word answer.
Okay, so we're going to start with Kathy Glosson and just go around the room, okay? Will you release your tax returns?
Yes.
Dr. McGuire?
Yes.
Will you release your tax returns, John Norris?
Yep.
And Fred Hubble?
Yes.
Yes. And Ross Wilburn?
Sure.
Okay.
If you win the nomination, what's the first phone call you make, Dr. McGuire?
It would be to the other fine people up here on this stage, because we need to unify, because the goal has always been to get a Democratic governor.
Lightning round.
And the question was who to support?
What's the first phone call that you make?
Who's the first phone call?
If you win the nomination.
Yeah, my opponents. Well, I assume I'll be with my wife, so yes, my opponents.
Mr. Hubble, first phone call?
I would call these people first.
Okay. Mr. Wilburn?
To be truthful, I will call my family first, and then these folks are.
Okay. Ms. Glosson?
I call Kim Reynolds and tell her I'm sorry.
All right. Mr. Norris, what's one issue you won't compromise on?
The one issue I won't compromise on, we covered it. I said this to the College Dumb Democrats. I'll lose this election over advocating for welcoming our new Iowans before I'll compromise on that.
Mr. Hubble, one issue you will never compromise on.
Fixing the budget and put it behind the right priorities so we have people first in our state.
Mr. Wilburn?
Civil rights. The civil rights movement is not over. We see that from our leadership in D.C. or lack thereof.
Ms. Glosson?
Universal single-payer health care.
Dr. McGuire?
Healthcare and making sure that patients are at the center.
Okay. Mr. Hubble, do you think Iowa should have term limits on governors?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Wilburn?
No.
Okay.
Maybe.
To Depends on who it is.
I can hear it.
I'm sorry, do you think Iowa should have term limits on governors?
Sure.
Mr. Norris, term limits on governors?
I don't think so, but I hope that all of us up here would be committed, if we win this race, to commit to serving a second term, because this is too hard to capture as Iowans, and we should all be willing to serve 2 terms to turn this state around.
All right, Mr. Wilburn, would you support raising the state sales tax by 3/8 cents for water quality?
For the outdoor recreation trust, yes, it was already approved by 63% of Iowans.
Kathy Glosson.
I know they approved it. It was the only thing on the ballot, but I don't support regressive sales taxes.
Dr. McGuire.
Yes, because the people spoke, and so I think we need to do that. But I would try to put in some help with earned income tax credit to take away the regressive nature of the tax.
Mr. Norris, raise the sales tax for water quality?
Yes, but make sure that we apply it to everyone that expects for parks and recreation and trails, as well as just addressing the water quality, which I think Iowans expected.
Mr. Hubble, raise the sales tax for water quality?
I would do it according to the constitutional amendment that was passed, constitutional funding, which sets out those requirements. I would certainly fund that, and we also need to make sure it's not regressive, so we have to offset that.
Okay.
Okay, Ms. Glosson, do you favor expanding medical cannabis?
Yes.
Okay, Dr. McGuire?
Yes, medical cannabis should be treated as any other drug.
Okay. Mr. Norris, expand medical cannabis?
Absolutely. The law they passed is just not functional. It has to be functional.
Okay. Mr. Hubble?
Yes, I would.
Okay. Mr. Wilburn?
Yes, because there are Iowans hurting and dying that can benefit from this, including some family members of mine.
Okay.
Do you favor decriminalizing marijuana, Dr. McGuire?
I would certainly look into it. I think it's right now hurting people of color, incarcerating them at a higher level, so I would certainly look into it.
John Norris, decriminalize marijuana?
Yes. Yeah.
Fred Hubble, decriminalize marijuana?
Not yet. I think we need to see actually how it works in other states for a longer period of time first.
Mr. Wilburn?
Yes, reduce the schedule that allows some experimentation, exploration, research for the research to be done, how to implement it.
And for your listeners, there's a distinction between legalization and decriminalization.
Yes, yes there is.
Okay, candidates, thank you so much for participating in tonight's debate. And we'd like to let you have the final word this evening with some closing statements. We drew for the order earlier this evening, and we will begin with Kathy Glosson.
Great. Thank you so much for hosting this tonight. This year in Iowa, we have a unique opportunity. And unlike my opponents on this stage tonight, I believe that if we reject politics as usual, telling us what it is that we have to settle for, and instead we demand what it is that we need, we can change Iowa forever. It's time for us to stand up together and fight for the things we care about, like ensuring universal single-payer health care to cover every Iowan, making unions available no matter where you work, making sure that our water is clean and that that's the birthright of every Iowan for clean water, fully funding public education and making college affordable to our students, and passing common sense gun reform. This is a bold progressive movement that we built from town to town, house to house, and I invite you to join our movement. I'm Kathy Glosson, and I would be honored to have your vote. Thank you so much.
Mr. Wilburn.
Thank you. And as I've traveled across the state, I've been hearing from Iowans and their concern about mental health care, your concern about clean water, about kids' education not providing for our future, about racial discrimination, about disparities, about concern from the LGBTQ+ community. What I've been hearing from you is that you don't recognize the state anymore. And also what you're saying is, let's be Iowa. You know, Iowans, they vote on issues. Iowans, they don't vote on opinion polls. They don't vote based on endorsements. Iowans vote on their issues, their hopes, Iowa values, Iowa dreams. I'm asking for your vote. Let's do this together. Let's be Iowa.
Mr. Norris.
Well, thank you so much for listening. We didn't talk much about education tonight. Education, public education is my #1 priority. I won't go cheap on our children's future, and I won't accept mediocrity in public education. We will be the best in Iowa again when I'm your governor. I'll also take on those corporate interests. We don't need a corporate governor. We need someone who fights for people. I'm going to wake up every day. How do we close this income gap? How do we empower workers? How do we increase quality of life for Iowans? I'm going to redefine economic development to not being what does the corporate need, but what are our human needs? That's what government and what we should be about as a people. Restore that sense of community, that love for the land, and that fundamental belief that public education is the great equalizer and provider of opportunity in our state. I would love the opportunity to serve as your governor.
Mr. Hubble.
Well, thank you all for watching tonight. I want to make sure that Iowa is known in the national news as a state that has some of the best health care, including mental health care, in our country. Not as a state that defunded Planned Parenthood and recently passed the most extreme anti-women's health care law in our country. I want Iowa to be able to recruit the jobs and the people of the future to our state because we have highly trained, educated workforce, good quality of life, and clean water, not big tax breaks. And I want Iowa to be known as a state that has a wonderful education system, back to being where it was before, #1 in the country, not as a state that stripped collective bargaining rights from our teachers. But let's face it, Governor Reynolds isn't going to fix the mess we're in because she doesn't even think it's a problem. But you know it's a problem, and I know it's a problem, and that's why I'm running for governor. That's why I need your support on June 5, so we can turn this state around and get it going in the right direction.
And Dr. McGuire.
Well, as you've heard tonight, we talk about health care, talk about fixing this Medicaid mess. We talk about mental health, substance abuse, and addiction. We talk about women's health. We talked about clean air and clean water. This is a public health issue. These are all health care issues. I have spent my life as a doctor and as someone in health care. I know with my expertise and my passion that I can fix and get solutions to these problems. And we need to do that for my kids and grandkids and for your kids and grandkids. That's the Iowa I see as governor. That's why I'd like to win this election on June 5th, and I ask for your support.
Thank you, candidates. That concludes this evening's debate. Just a reminder that we will be back here tomorrow night, same time, same place, with different Democratic candidates, the ones running for the 3rd District U.S. House seat. They're all vying for the nomination to challenge incumbent Republican Congressman David Young.
This is all leading up to primary day, Tuesday, June 5th. You can go to iowavoterready.org to find your polling place. We thank you so much for joining us this evening here at the State Historical Building. Have a wonderful night, and now we can hear it from the audience.